The medical missionary work, at least according to council, is defined as the right arm of the gospel. And when you think about the right arm of the gospel, or in practice, the function of the right arm, or even the entering wedge, it's to give you access. Now the question is, access to what? And in this case, for medical missionary work, it's access to people's hearts. So I see medical missionary work as the gospel in practice, right? Rather than just the theory, it allows us as God's people to practice the gospel, to experience it through interaction with people, through evangelism. That's not just in the pulpit, but in going out and reaching out to people.
When an individual, a medical missionary in this case, interacts with people in a given community with an intention of, one, meeting their immediate needs. Immediate needs could be health related, like illnesses, lifestyle diseases, even infectious diseases, and trying to alleviate their pain. And in the process, get to form a relationship with them that can help this person to share the love of Christ with them.
Medical missionary work is Christ-like work for the body and Christ-like work for the soul.
A medical missionary is an individual who dedicates his life, or perhaps a better time of his life, to try and meet people at their points, try and elevate suffering in whichever capacity that person is in. It could be a very small thing, a very small aspect in life, perhaps being somebody mentally. It engrosses a lot of things. The major point is a willingness to devote your service, that selfless love, and then you definitely become a medical missionary.
Is a work that Seventh-day Adventists are supposed to participate in promoting healthful living according to the will of God.
Okay.
Yeah, because we say as Seventh-day Adventists, we have a health message.
Yeah.
And so that health message is what makes us medical missionaries.
In Testimonies for the Church, Volume 7, page 62, it says that we have come to a time when every member of the church should take hold of medical missionary work. Every member of the church should be a medical missionary.
Every disciple of God is born into his kingdom a missionary. So everyone who's converted should ideally be a medical missionary worker.
Everybody should be a medical missionary worker, because it's not for specific people. It's not for some elite group that are supposed to follow that line, but it's for every church member.
I think anyone with a passion to see the gospel reach all the four corners of the world, and also anyone who is passionate about alleviating pain and helping people who are in need, meeting people where they are at and helping them, any such person qualifies to be a medical missionary.
When you think of medical missionaries, first of all, maybe I need to clarify that the terminology, remember when Ellen G. White wrote, it's not recently.
Mm-hmm.
We are talking of so many years ago, and the terminology is changing over time. Mm-hmm. When we say medical today, we mean completely different things because we have a medical science, a full-fledged medical science. Okay. that is in place. But if you will allow me, I will read a quote here by Ellen G. White.
Sure.
In a book, A Call to Medical Evangelism and Health Education. Mm-hmm. And this is what Ellen White says in paragraph 5, page 5, paragraph 6. It says, a forward step is imperative, a new note must be struck. Thousands of laymen must now hear and repeat the call to medical missionary evangelism. She's saying laymen must hear this message. Mm-hmm. Then she says, hundreds of nurses, take note of nurses, mm-hmm. who have had a thorough training in denominational sanitariums. Again, that's another terminology, sanitarium, should engage in medical evangelism. Now, laymen should hear and repeat. That means laymen are supposed to learn. Learn from who? Then she says, hundreds of nurses who have had a thorough training in our sanitariums should engage in evangelism, and with some additional training, these nurses could be leaders in the work. And she says scores of young men should qualify to be lecturers, not lecturers in the university sense, but preachers. Then she goes on to say, take note of this, physicians. Now, physicians are not students of physics. Physicians refers to medical doctors. Physicians should sense fully their responsibility of imparting the message of health and temperance in talks and lectures, in Adventist churches and before non-Adventist audiences in the great cities. Ministers should lead out as organizers and teachers of bands of young evangelists. So she's saying doctors and nurses should teach people. Ministers should organize. Laymen should hear and repeat the message. So that answers directly the question of who should participate.
But then,
yeah, so everyone participates, but with a different role. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So you mean everyone is called, but there's a specific role each one should play according to their level of knowledge.
Yes, according to their expertise in that field. That's why she highlights the importance of nurses who have been trained and physicians who have been trained. And when it comes to ministers, pastors like myself, she says, we organize. I organize the meeting, but I cannot be the one presenting the technical issues of health when there are people who are trained. I organize the meeting, other people do it, and by doing that, all of us are participating in medical missionary work.
That's making new medical missionary workers.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very important. It's very important because it gives you a platform of reaching people. There's a lot of suffering in the world today. When you look around the cities, even in the rural areas, there's a lot of pain and suffering. And by meeting people and helping them and sympathizing with them, you get a platform to lead them to Jesus. Therefore, it's very important as a platform of leading people to Jesus.
Medical missionary work is the right hand of the gospel. By right hand of the gospel, I mean that it is part of the gospel, it's connected to the gospel. The gospel is not complete without its right hand. And what does the right hand do? In this sense, in this case, the right hand opens the door for the gospel to come in. So medical missionary work, therefore, is the pioneer work of the gospel. When missionaries came to Africa, they set up schools and hospitals. These were means through which they attracted people, and once people got into the system, then they became more receptive of the gospel. So if you have a body that has no right hand, we call that crippled. So if there is any gospel that has no medical missionary work, it is a crippled gospel.
I believe it's very important because of the role it plays in actually reaching the hearts of people. If you talk about an entering wedge or the right arm, we need access to people's hearts, people's minds. So this work does what a sermon or a Bible study is not able to do. When I'm able to reach someone's heart in order to share the gospel, then yes, it is a very important work.
It helps people get well sometimes at no cost, and some other times at very little cost as compared to contemporary medicine.
For someone to do a work that could meet somebody, or this work, and this is a solemn work, self has to entirely do what? Entirely die. So most of the time, I believe the challenge comes in pride. Pride manifesting itself in any of the medical missionary workers, or anyone who wants to do the work of ministry. When pride comes in, then these people are not open to what? They're not open to correction, they're not open to cooperation. And when somebody is doing something, they don't care, they don't mind to do a clear study, to have a background knowledge of actually true science, and to balance it with what? With all the known knowledge.
it deserves attention, and Sister White explains why it should be given attention, because it becomes an easy introduction of the Adventist message to the world. Remember, the world may not be ready to hear difficult things like the Sabbath is not Sunday, it is Saturday. And so the entering wage is the medical missionary work. And I need to highlight that when we say medical missionary work, it is actually the Adventist health message that we are taking out there. In the past, we used to summarize it, issues like New Start. Now we use another acronym of celebrations. This is a message we take out there. We are telling people that you can live a healthful life. You can live a better life for the glory of God. So this becomes an entering wage. It does not become a message that is in totality itself sufficient. No. Once we introduce the health message to the people and the people are interested, then now we bring in the issue of, the need to keep the law of God. Then, now we introduce them to biblical truths that must lead them to baptism.
So personally, I find medical missionary work exciting. The reason being because I have a passion in seeing people being well, people having good health. So in some way it aligns well with my passion. And so I find it exciting since I play a part in helping people to do what? To become well, mentally, physically, and spiritually.
Yeah, it's so exciting. To me when I just use simple methods. Maybe someone was suffering from a certain disease. You see the person is so helpless, and then just do a simple method, a simple remedy, and through the power of God, the people get healed. And it's so good to see people happy and people enjoying life because of just simple methods that God has given us.
It's exciting because when you look at it with the end in view, Jesus worked, and with the end in view, when he saw the reward of his sacrifice, his work, he is satisfied. Therefore, I can say it's exciting because at the end of the day, it gives a sense of satisfaction, a sense of fulfillment, having helped someone else thrive better.
Definitely it is exciting because when you try to address someone's needs, especially at the point where they are so low, that excitement, there is a law that says that that which you do to someone is always reflected back to you. So the joy when somebody is healed or somebody's sickness is elevated, definitely that joy is translated to you.
It is exciting. I have had a little experience in doing medical missionary work, that is in the field, in the community, working with people, and that has been the most fulfilling aspect of my life so far, because there you get to interact with people one-on-one, and you get to form bonds with people that enable you to reach to their very hearts, because some of them get to open up completely about them, about their fears, about their relationship with God and what they don't understand. And it's really a way of getting to the people, and that makes it very interesting to me.
I believe it's taking place. I think the biggest challenge maybe we have in our context is that there are small groups that are scattered everywhere. That can be a good or a bad thing. It can be bad in that there may be no harmony in terms of the message. And this is a challenge we see as well in medical missionary work. There are also factions that disagree on certain aspects. So I believe our greatest need at the moment as workers for God really is the Spirit of God. Why? The Spirit of God is what allows us to be truly in harmony, to truly be one as Christ was one with his disciples and as he desires to be one with us.
The state of medical missionary work in Kenya, first of all, to give a general observation, you realize that the work is going on, yes. However, because of various instances and various things that are not in a proper way articulated, the work has been marred with a lot of confusion, I would rather use that word, because when you view the various people who are in this line of work, that unity is not manifest. So, in as much as the work is going on, there still needs some strengthening somewhere, and there still needs people should come up with the proper guidelines to make this work appealing, and also to make this work, to give medical missionary work a proper view. So essentially is that there is work, yes, going on, but that work has not reached the standard that it ought to do what it ought to reach. Upon which, if it reaches that standard, then I believe that the gospel will go on so well, and even this work will be embraced by the entire society.
For sure, the status quo, the state of medical missionary work, at least in Kenya and in Kisii, where I reside, is deplorable. For one, there is a great rift between gospel ministers and those who call themselves medical missionaries, and that gap is wider now than it has ever been, ever. So it's indeed deplorable. It's a sorry state.
I must admit that there are extremes, and it's not a new thing. It has always been there. Wherever God wants to do a work, Satan is always there to counteract the influence that God is creating. And therefore, it's not something surprising, I could say. There are extremes, and there have been extremes, and that is why we have to look at the pattern of Jesus. Anything that is unchristlike, you can know it's not of Jesus. And that is why we should always strive to look at the pattern of Jesus and strive by His grace to imitate His pattern, so that the influence that the work will have on people will be an influence that will draw them to Jesus and desire to be Christians and ultimately to go to heaven. And so I would say the first place to start is to follow the pattern of Jesus. Look at Jesus, the way He worked, the way He spoke, the way He interacted with people, the way He taught, the way He taught principles and even practices. And when we copy that pattern, then we will not be extreme. No, there are two sides of extremes. There are those who are fanatical, and there are those who are liberal. So we have to look at the perfect pattern, who is Jesus. And when we look at the perfect pattern, we can never go wrong. That's why I would really encourage us, if we would want to do such a work, let us imitate the example of Jesus, and He will ultimately guide us where He wants us to be.
Some few have gotten it, but the majority have missed the point.
Okay.
Number one, when you have a group of people who separate themselves and say that we are medical missionaries, they pull from the rest of the church and they operate like a parallel unit. That's not how the gospel work is done.
Mhm.
The passage I just read said, laymen should come to hear and learn. Nurses come in, physicians come in, ministers come in. Anytime medical missionaries operate by themselves, it is wrong, number one. Number two, when it becomes an avenue of opposing modern medical science, it is also another mistake. Because when you study the medical science that was used at the time of E.G. White, it was totally right to be opposed. But that cannot be said 100% today of the medical science. So when we make medical missionary work, it's like we are now in permanent position of everything that modern science does, modern medical science. That is not medical missionary work. It could be opposition, it could be anything else. And then when we take over medical missionary work to be alternative treatment of illnesses, you cannot go get people from hospitals where they are being treated for diabetes, hypertension, and what have you, and then out of anecdote stories that 10 people are cured in Congo, 35 people in Ethiopia, and you just pull people out of a plan, it is dangerous. They may survive, they may look like they are okay, but you need to understand that these herbs are chemicals equally. When they get into the human body, they have side effects and they cause their own imbalances. You may tone down the diabetes, but you may destroy the kidneys. You may tone down the diabetes, but eventually that person may develop a cancerous situation that will kill them a few years later. So while you are celebrating that we have done well with the diabetes, you are killing the person a few years down the line.
I believe it has to begin with the church creating that environment to nurture this work so that people don't practice it away from the church. We need to recognize that the church is a place where we can be nurtured and that we can grow into this work because it is our work. We are to be a part of this work. And in terms of people who teach maybe certain teachings which may not be in harmony, it's for us to pray and also approach them with a loving heart, where we're not trying to show them that they're wrong, but we're trying to show them or point them to Christ's method rather than our method. I think that the problem comes when we are trying to impose our ideas. No, we're trying to point people to Christ. That's the best way to correct, I believe.
Education. The problem with the system is, I'm sure anyone can bear me witness who's been in the church long enough. We have our Bible study guides in the Sabbath school classes. We have these educational programs in the church, but none, at least from the regular lines, have ever educated people on medical missionary work. I've never read any, at least in the last 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago since I started reading the lesson book. So that means that there is no education. And those who think they are doing medical missionary work are to a great extent unguided. And so because of that, it has caused them to take very extreme positions as regards to medical missionary work. Some think that if you treat using the conventional drugs or the conventional medicine, they think that you cannot qualify to be a medical missionary. But that's so wrong. Medical missionaries like studying about one John Harvey Kellogg. Kellogg was a doctor, was a medical doctor. He treated people using morphine in his surgeries. He performed surgeries. Now, many people think that if you are a surgeon, you cannot be a medical missionary worker, but that's wrong. So what's lacking when we see all those bad things are happening, it's simply because people are not being educated in the church.
Our textbook is the Bible. Our blueprint is the life of Christ on earth. So when you look at Matthew 10 and Luke 10, in Matthew 10, Christ is sending his disciples. And when he is sending, we are going to see what he is sending them out to do. I'll read Matthew 10, verse 7 and 8. Verse 7 says, "And as ye go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand." Verse 8, "Heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out devils. Freely ye have received, freely give." So when Christ is sending out his disciples, he's sending them both to preach and to do what? To heal. They are supposed to combine the two. And that is the same thing Christ was doing when he was on earth. He was healing, he was setting free those who are bound by demons, and the blind were receiving eyesight, and then after doing that, he was telling them, he was bidding them, "Follow me." So he was healing them first. He was meeting them where they're at. He was relieving them of of whatever problems they had, and then bidding them follow me, meaning that healing is supposed to precede what? The gospel message. And it's the same scenario we see in Luke 10 when he is now sending the 70 also. And he tells them, verse 9 says, "And heal the sick that are therein, and say unto them, the kingdom of God is come nigh unto you." You see, so they're supposed to heal first and then preach or share the word of Christ or share the gospel. So it is not right, the scenario that we have in church these days, where we have medical missionaries acting totally independently of the gospel, or of pastors, or of people that are supposed to come together and support the work. Actually, every individual is supposed to take part in this work. Any individual who is looking forward to the coming of Christ is supposed to do or play a part in hastening that coming. And part of hastening that coming is by taking up medical missionary work.
Well, I could love all medical missionaries or people who do such a work to emulate the example of Jesus. Jesus is our example in all things. He's the great physician. He ministered to people physically, mentally, spiritually. He had a word in season for everyone. And when we follow his example, I'm sure we will have a wonderful pattern, and many people will be blessed as a result of this work being done. Not only in Christian circles, but even people who have never heard of Jesus, they can learn something about Jesus through the example that they see.
In our context, we first need a true revival and reformation. The Lord reminds us that the sacrifices which He delights in are that of a broken spirit and a contrite heart. So we need humility and we need conversion. Once we have conversion, then everything else will fall into place. We need true conversion.
There are many different approaches that one can give the work, but one that I have seen in my little experience, one that I have seen really working is a one-on-one relationship with people in a community. For example, after identifying a certain community you would like to work with, so you can go there and have that one-on-one relationship with people. And it can also be done through health expos, and health expos are better because they can help you reach many people at a go. But they have a downside to interacting with people personally. Like, there's a level of interaction you'll not have with people when they come to a health expo. But when you visit people at home, there's that advantage of getting to know them and interacting with them in a way that you may not be able to interact with them in a setting where there are many other people around. So basically, it's those two ways: interacting with people by visiting them in their homes and working closely with them. And there's also conducting medical expos at specific places where people can come and get basic checks, and get advice on a history can be taken, and they can get advice on what changes they can do or they can make in their lives that can help them live more healthfully, and that can even help reverse some of the diseases they suffer from.
I think the best kind of approach is to have open meetings where we talk about and say, this is what Sister White says, and this is what is being practiced. We need to align them together. And we need to understand that when we talk of Adventist health message, medical missionary work, it's Adventist health message. It is not anything that is too new that we did not know about. We need to embrace it and know it's everyone's assignment. It's not just an assignment of a special group of people who are more unique or better off than anyone else. Yeah. So I think talking about it will help. Anytime there is a society issue, talk. The government calls it civil education. So maybe we need civil education in the church. Yeah.
Well, the church is actually the vessel, appointed vessel to accomplish the work of the gospel. So definitely, if this is something that is going to help in the movement and also to help in the fulfillment of the gospel, then I believe that the church has a clear role to play, and it should actually embrace this entirely.
Many churches have not fully embraced this message, but the few that have embraced the message, they support missionaries for medical missionary work. And it's my plea that all the churches should embrace this work, because it is very important work in these last days. And so it's a call to the church that they may support both by sending out missionaries and also by embracing the trainings and also the literature relevant to medical missionary work.
I believe medical missionary work was instituted from 1863. Thank you for that. I believe it was instituted in 1863 when the church was instituted. And from that time, there have been people who've viewed the work in a divergent view, who've had different views. I believe it's time for us to pray more honestly for our leaders, for the church members. We don't want to risk bringing contention or unnecessary contention because we want to run with the work. I'll give an example of some counsel which Ellen White gave James White when he differed with Uriah Smith on some area of doctrine of prophecy. It was in regards to the plucking up of the 3 horns in the book of Daniel. Now, as much as James White was right, the spirit which he had towards Uriah Smith was wrong. So for us as church members or medical missionary workers, we may be right, but what kind of spirit do we have even when we're trying to correct others? Is it a Christ-like spirit, or is it a spirit of strife, which is obviously the spirit of Satan? So I believe our greatest need is the Spirit of God.
I've not seen a lot of involvement of the church, at least within the area I reside in Kenya or in Kisii, because the subject has not been given much attention. And the result is some young people, especially, have read statements in the writings of Ellen White and have been convicted of medical missionary work, but there's no one to guide them, no one to teach them what's supposed to be done on those lines. And so people have taken very extreme positions about medical missionary work. The result, they've tried to treat people who are suffering from various chronic diseases. Some have died, some have ended up in a terrible state than they were before. And we know a lot of young people who've even quit school, thinking that in order to qualify to be a medical missionary, you need to quit school and all your secular endeavors. And so that has caused those in the regular lines to despise medical missionary work. And the opposite is true. Medical missionary workers, or those who call themselves medical missionary workers, have despised the gospel ministers. And so there is a wide gap between the two that needs to be bridged. They need to know that the gospel minister, should be interested in the work of the medical missionary. The medical missionary should be interested in the work of the gospel minister.
Yeah, sure. I would really encourage church members to take hold of this work, genuine medical missionary work. It will break barriers. It will subdue people who have been prejudiced against the truth. It will open hearts. It will open fields that have been barren, places where Jesus has not found entrance. He can find entrance through genuine medical missionary work. And therefore, churches should embrace this even as they do evangelistic work.
I will speak from observation that the church has provided a platform.
Okay.
In our camp meetings, there is a slot for a health message to be presented. It is only unfortunate that camp organizers think that the sellers of herbs are the medical missionaries. So you find a congregation full of medical doctors, for example, and nurses, sitting down to listen to a herbalist. I think something is wrong. That something is totally wrong. My thinking is that the church should call upon its medical professionals. The church has got medical professionals. If they may not be available for the whole week, they can go to a camp at least once in a week, and for 1 hour, explain to the people the marriage between what the church teaches and what the church teaches is available. The medical professions can read it and explain it to us so that it is done in a consistent way, instead of making it so unique and mysterious that only a few individuals And I think something else that has misled people is that because literature evangelists are selling books about, herbs and juices and what have you, people think that the church now is in the business that we are supposed to read these books, develop these products and sell them. No. Remember, these are preventive.
I wouldn't condemn someone who goes to school, and it is not true that you have to quit school to be a medical missionary. It's not true that you have to quit school to be a medical missionary. And that is why I would say we need to strike a right balance. There are some people who may be convicted that maybe my choice of study or studies may not help me in any way to be an influence to someone to the kingdom. And you're convicted maybe to take another course of study or to do something else. I wouldn't condemn someone because of that. But to say that I have to quit school for me to be a medical missionary, because maybe you've been influenced by other people or friends, but you don't have a conviction from God, and you've not prayed about it, then I would say that is just fanatical. So it's good to be certain that truly, God, what would you have me to do? Is it your will for me to quit school? Is it your will for me to go and be a medical missionary, like to dedicate my time fully to do that kind of work? So it's important, because you can still be a medical missionary as a professional. I am a health worker. I work with different people. I meet patients, and I do that still and be a blessing to people that I meet, and I can still do medical missionary work. So I would encourage all of us, wherever you are, whatever profession, you can use that as a platform to reach out to souls.
You don't have to quit your work, because actually majority of the people who come from that school of thought have always embedded the idea that this kind of education is kind of not holistic. And I find that kind of puzzling, because when you look at medical missionary work, we look at examples in the Bible. We find people who add their careers, and in spite, for example, look at the example of Paul, because when I quit medical missionary workers, I look at the example of Paul, who was a lay evangelist. I see him doing tent making and still doing the evangelism work. It's a matter of striking a balance and understanding what essentially is needed. However, the movement that comes that you have to leave this for you to be a good medical missionary worker, or you have to give out this, on that question, I believe they get it from the wrong direction.
There is no such command, not in the Bible, nor in the spirit of prophecy, that someone has to quit their secular pursuits, be it education, be it secular work or whatever, in order to qualify to be a medical missionary worker, a medical missionary worker. For you to be a medical missionary, you need to be faithful where God has placed you, to use your influence to minister to the needs of people and then lead them to Jesus. Just that. That does not need you to quit anything, to quit any secular endeavor or any studies. So that's a fallacy that has really affected medical missionary work drastically, in Kenya at least.
I want you to take note of the words of Jesus in Matthew 24 when he talked about the end of time. And actually referring to our living, Jesus makes that statement that has also been misused by other people, that 2 men will be working in the field. Talking about the coming of Jesus, that until the coming of Jesus, people will be engaging in activities. 2 men will be here, 2 women will be here, 1 will be taken, 1 will be left. Now, that's not a reference to secret rapture. That is a reference to investigative judgment. As we are waiting for Jesus to come, we must continue participating. We must continue participating in our day-to-day activities. It was wrong. Even in 1844, people sold everything and waited for Jesus to come. It's a wrong attitude. Continue with your studies. Jesus will not refuse to take you to heaven because you trained in this field or that field, continue with your training. Because while you are there, you preach while there. While you are training and in your profession, you continue preaching. Yeah. Now, herbalism and these others are a business that is available in the world to anyone. Mm-hmm. Anyone can sell herbs. In Africa, in the African economy before the white man came to interrupt our way of life, mm-hmm. we had our own medical science in quotes. We could treat our diseases, we could diagnose and take care of it. And our primary source of medication were the herbs. We would pick them and, chew others, boil others, and what have you. Now, that kind of business does not need you to be an Adventist. I mean, anyone can sell herbs, and herbs are being sold by everyone. We have herbal toothpaste, herbal soap, herbal everything. That doesn't make it Adventist. That's just a business. And Adventists are not engaged in herbal business. Just because it is herbal does not make it Adventist or right. Some herbs are poisonous. Cannabis sativa, for example, is a poison. And it is herbs. So you can't say that just because it's a herb, it's good. No, some herbs are poisonous. We know of let's say, cassava. There's very poisonous cassava that has potassium, tapioca, very dangerous. So not everything, just because we say, oh, let's go back to Eden. No, tobacco is there. It's also equally poisonous. So I think it is important to separate the two. The Adventist health message is holistic. It is not a business of running around with powders and liquids distributing to the people. It is an entering wage that becomes the introduction before the gospel is shared.
The difference between medical missionary work and naturopathy or herbalism, the difference is that medical missionary work touches all the three faculties of man: the mental, the physical, and the spiritual. For instance, in the book of Mark chapter 2, there was a man that was sick of palsy, we are told. And when he was brought to Jesus, Jesus first tells him, "Son, be of good cheer." That means that Jesus basically healed him mentally. When he tells him, "Be of good cheer," it means that he had a mental issue that Jesus had to solve. Jesus solved. Number 2, he tells him, "Your sins be forgiven thee." What that means is he touched the spiritual faculty by forgiving his sin. And lastly, he tells the man, "Arise, take up your bed and walk." So Jesus healed him physically. So medical missionary work is Christ-like work for the body and Christ-like work for the soul. But herbalism is purely treatment of the physical ailment or maladies using herbs. The connection between medical missionary work and the loud cry. I'll read a statement that was written in the Review and Herald, November 22nd, 1892. Ellen White says here, "The time of test is just upon us, for the loud cry of the third angel has already begun in the revelation of the righteousness of Christ, the sin-pardoning Redeemer. This is the beginning of the light of the angel whose glory shall fill the whole earth." In 1892, Ellen White wrote that the loud cry had already begun. So ours is to find out what had taken place just before she wrote these things. It would be interesting to know that from 1888, when the message of Christ our righteousness went around the church, Kellogg was one of the attendees. He attended the Minneapolis conference. And from the conference, Ellen White wrote that Kellogg was a converted man. So what happened after 1888? Kellogg went back to Battle Creek and began, he established an orphanage. Number 2, he established something that we call a visiting nurses program. And then he also established a Christian Helps Band. So when these things were fully operational, by 1892, Ellen White could write that the loud cry had already begun and that this was the beginning of the light that should fill the whole world. We know of this light in Revelation chapter 18. So, if the loud cry began by a revival of medical missionary work, it therefore means for the loud cry that aborted in the 1900s, of course, the loud cry, for it to be revived, there has to be a revival of medical missionary work. So, I'll take a few moments to explain what that means. When Jesus came to this world, he came for one purpose. Many a times we think that Jesus came to die for us, but we are told that Jesus came to reveal the Father. That's why when Philip told Jesus in John chapter 14, Philip asked Jesus that show us the Father and it would be enough. Jesus told Philip, have I been so long with you, Philip, and here you are asking me to show you the Father? If you have seen me, you have seen the Father. So Jesus came to reveal the Father, and the method he used to reveal the Father was a combined ministry of preaching and healing. In Matthew chapter 9 verse 35, we are told that Jesus went to all cities and villages preaching and healing. When Jesus sent the 12 disciples in Luke chapter 9, he sent them to preach and to heal. In Luke chapter 10, when he sent the 70 as well, Jesus sent them to preach and to heal. And in Mark 16, in the all-encompassing Gospel Commission, Jesus commissions us today to preach and to heal. And this is the method Jesus used. We are told in the book Ministry of Healing, page 143, we are told, Christ's method alone will give true success in reaching the people. The Savior mingled with men as one who desired their good. He showed his sympathy for them, ministered to their needs, then he bade them, follow me. There is only one method that would give true success in reaching the people. And we need to keep that in mind when we are commissioned that before the end should come in Matthew chapter 24 verse 14, the gospel has to go to all the world. And the method that the gospel will therefore use to go to all the world is to combine preaching and healing, just like Jesus did. And so, if we go back to the history that I've just given, when there was a combined ministry of preaching and healing, healing was presented in the orphanage, the visiting nurses program, the Christian Helps Band. When that was done, the loud cry began. In the 1900s, there was a great crisis in the church that we call the alpha of apostasy that involved Kellogg. Most of the time we look at it from the perspective of spiritualism, from the idea of pantheism. You know, when Kellogg began to imagine and when he began to believe that God is in everything, the idea that we call pantheism, and that led to that great apostasy, and finally he got disfellowship from the church, and there was a rift between medical missionary work and the gospel work of the church. But what we usually leave out is that not long after his apostasy, John Harvey Kellogg bought the entire Battle Creek Sanitarium from the church. And the result of that apostasy was a separation between medical missionary work and gospel ministry, which heretofore had been working so closely. And in fact, leading to this time, or leading to the revival in 1888 all the way to the early 1900s, Kellogg was pushing for the gospel ministers to take hold of medical missionary work, because he was convicted that should this happen, the loud cry would do its work. But unfortunately, when he got discouraged, Satan took advantage of him and began to give him those pantheistic ideas which he made evident in his writings. And the result is medical missionary work, which is supposed to be united with the gospel work, became severed. And a great gap was created between medical missionary work and the gospel work. And as we've just seen, when these two were united, the loud cry began. It therefore means that when these two were separated, the loud cry aborted. And this is what I sometimes call the deadly wound of the health message. We have a deadly wound in the Adventist church as well. And so if we are to experience the loud cry in these last days, we must see a revival of medical missionary work. Allow me to read a few statements. Allow me to read a statement. Allow me to read a statement from the pen of inspiration, and then we'll try to examine that in a way that we can best understand and in the way that it's applicable to the days in which we live in, especially in the last days. This is from the Pacific Union Recorder, August 1, 1901. Ellen White says, "We shall see the missionary work in all its branches, evangelical, medical, broadening and deepening at every point of its progress because of the inflowing of hundreds and thousands of streams until the whole earth is covered as the waters cover the sea." We shall see a revival of medical missionary work in these last days. And how are we supposed to relate to that? Actually, because of the interest of time, I'd like to just jump over a few things that I think are very essential in this regard. There are only 2 times Ellen White promotes something that we may call insubordination of church authority. Only 2 incidents. One was during the 1888 revival. The church authority especially would not receive the message of Christ our righteousness by the 2 brothers, A.T. Jones and Wagoner. Ellen White took it upon herself to send them across churches in the US and around to preach that message. In other words, she did something that we may call insubordination. She disobeyed church authority, as it were. That's one. The other time that Ellen White promoted this kind of insubordination, we'll find it written in the book Testimonies for the Church, Volume 8, page 71 through 75. I'll read in parts. It says, "The medical missionary workers are doing the long neglected work which God gave to the church in Battle Creek. They are giving the last call to supper. That if you are engaged in genuine medical missionary work, you are doing the very same work that God gave to this church." And she went on to say, "In order for it to be carried aright, the medical missionary work needs talent. It requires strong, willing hands and wise discriminating management. But can this be done while those in responsible places, presidents of conferences and ministers, by the way, the Lord says to the presidents of conferences and to other influential brethren, remove the stumbling blocks that have been placed before the people." She goes on to say, "The time is short and there is a great work to be done." She's addressing conference presidents. She says, "Time is short and there is a great work to be done. If you feel no interest in the work that is going forward, if you will not encourage medical missionary work in the churches, it will be done without your consent, for it is the work of God and it must be done. My brethren and sisters, take your position on the Lord's side and be honest, active, and courageous workers and courageous co-workers with Christ, laboring with him to seek and save the lost." Ellen White is saying, addressing conference presidents, she's telling them that if they will not support medical missionary work, it will be done without their consent, for it is the Lord's work. And those who take up medical missionary work, she says, it's like they're taking their position on the Lord's side. That's drawn from Exodus 32, when after the children of Israel worshipped the golden calf, Moses stood and called unto them and said, "Who is on the Lord's side?" And the tribe of Levi came over.